皆さん
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the moderator for this session. My name is OKONOGI. We're spending 90 minutes to look into the theme of Northeast Asian security amid U.S.-China competition. I'd like to first introduce the speakers we have with us today. Right next to me is Professor Izumi, and we also have with us a former ambassador of Japan to the Conference on Disarmament, Ambassador Takamizawa from South Korea, and Chancellor of KNDA, Dr. Kim, and from Taiwan, Dr. Tien. Chairman Tien, I think it's the first time we see each other. Thank you for joining us. Now, how to proceed? We'd like to look into North Korean situation, the East China Sea, and also Taiwan. So there are 3 topics that we are to cover, and I think they're all very sensitive issues and regions. In the program, it says Professor Izumi and Dr. Kim. Well, I believe that you will be covering North Korea mostly, and Ambassador Takamizawa will be talking about Japan's response, and Dr. Tien will be talking about the situation in Taiwan. I believe that will be the case. The order will be, in the order on the program, Professor Izumi first. Next, Dr. Kim. And we'll change slightly this order. Dr. Tien will be speaking, and then at the end we'll ask Ambassador Takamizawa. So each will have 7 minutes to speak. Please update us on the current situation or what impact the U.S.-China competition is likely to have on the region, and also the Biden administration, the birth of this new administration, what impact will it have? And then, once we have a number of topics covered, we'd like to talk about the future outlook, what is expected of Japan, what role Japan can play. We'd like to have an in-depth discussion on those issues. And I don't know how much time will be left at the end, but if possible, we would like to take questions from the viewers. Well, you have your specific areas of expertise. So we ask you to focus on your areas of expertise. Let's begin with Professor Izumi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okonogi. I am Izumi, professor of Tokyo International University. I like to talk about North Korea, the DPRK, mainly. As Professor Okonogi said, the current is that we have competition and rivalry between the U.S. and China, and also the current status, as well as the approach of the Biden administration. So when I talk about the status quo, I believe that the situation surrounding North Korea is stabilized. It's stable, and our biggest concern, that is their very hostile or provocative or militant activities, is not much of a concern at this point in time. But what's important when looking at the current status is the 8th Workers' Party of Korea party convention was held between January 5th and 12th, and immediately after that, the Supreme People's Assembly session will be held immediately after that meeting, and the party's Central Commission Assembly will be held not just once, but 2 times within just 1 month. They were all held within 1 month. So it was a set. They first had the Workers' Party of Korea meeting, and then the 2 Central Commission meetings, assemblies, and then the Supreme People's Assembly. And so North Korea had considered all of these 4 forums as a package, which means that they probably want to focus centrally on the economy. And that's what they want to do, I guess, but I believe that they're half forced into focusing on the economy, because when you look at the past 5 years of North Korea's behavior domestically, they have completed the ICBM program. That is, they have complete deterrence against the United States now, or so they claim. And so regarding the U.S. threat, they no longer have to be so fearful of the American threat. So that's a major change. Also, they have essentially abandoned their slogan of unification of North and South Korea. And these were used as excuses for the poor economic performance, because there's the U.S. threat. They cannot focus on the economy and can't develop the economy. And because they are forced under a very heavy burden of unification, they cannot take economic policies to grow. But now they have been liberated from these 2 excuses, which means that they'll have to concentrate on the economy. But having said so, they cannot achieve high economic growth, which means that they need the introduction of foreign capital, especially from South Korea. So North Korea is coveting capital injection from South Korea. But the UN Security Council's sanctions prohibit the South Korean capital from reaching North Korea, so they cannot hope for high levels of economic growth. So for the next 5 years, they would, rather than aiming for a high economic growth, will have to use their own domestic resources for growth. But they're talking about self-innovation and also self-sufficiency and self-sufficiency. And so that's a unified slogan for them, which means that they have given up. They relying on outside help or resources. They'll have to do with what they have. And I believe that North Korea is very restrained vis-a-vis the United States. They're using the words, they will take hardline measures against hardline policies, but to goodwill, they will return goodwill. So hardline versus hardline is, that's the first time they use that slogan. In the past, they said if the United States takes a hardline attitude against them, they'll take super hardline attitude. But now they're saying just hardline attitude against the United States, which means that they're quite restrained, which means that North Korea's testing of ICBMs or nuclear missiles, I think, will be unthinkable for the near-term future. They will be more self-restrained. And the military parade they did hold in October, they had another military parade. And in October, the new ICBM, the new or SLBM, new types of SLBM missiles were actually showcased. And on January 14th, in that military parade, they restricted themselves to just the SLBM because they knew that the ICBM will stimulate the United States. And of course, what's showcased in the parades may be mock-ups, and it's meaningless without being tested. But North Korea, I don't think, has the intention to test any of these missiles today. So the U.S. and China's confrontation or rivalry, how will that affect North Korea's attitude? Actually, I don't think there will be much of an impact. The reason being peace and stability on the Korean peninsula and North Korea's opposition to North Korea's ICBM testing or nuclear program. Means in those regards, the U.S. and China see eye to eye. Their interests collide. So I don't think that there will be a negative fallout from this confrontation between the U.S. and China. But because they are in rivalry, North Korea cannot expect much cooperation from either side. But there will not be too much of an impact because their interests collide. But how about under the Biden administration? I think what's very important is that North Korea's assessment of Biden is not so bad. It's not bad at all. And this is not taken up very much, but North Korea has actually, well, he was the head of the Foreign Policy Commission in the Senate, and for 2 times, so they know what he does, and they know that Biden is an engager. He wants to engage with North Korea, so they have hopes and expectations toward the Biden administration, I believe. And another important thing is that if the United States engages in negotiations with North Korea, what Biden aims to do will be to take step-by-step measures in order to build up measures one by one, which a slow approach, which is preferable for North Korea. So working-level negotiations, I think, are quite possible with the Biden administration. The Biden administration, I believe North Korea believes will survive only 4 years. So the State Advisor, Mr. Sullivan, says, go fast and be bold. That's, I think, what Biden will do. They may hurry things up, which means that by the latter half of this year, the U.S. and North Korean working-level negotiations may begin as early as the latter half of this year. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Izumi. I think it was a very straightforward assessment of what is happening right now in North Korea. Dr. Kim, having heard Professor Izumi speak, what was your impression, including your impression at the outset, opening? Can you spend 7 minutes to talk about what's happening in North Korea? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much. And really, I'm so honored to be here with renowned experts and scholars. And actually, I'm going to start with the current security situation of East Asia, and then at the end of on the discussion, I'll respond to Dr. Izumi. In today's world, in the long-lasting economic slump and widening inequality, trade protectionism, and weakening democracy, and increasing insecurity altogether have been shaking liberal international order. Brexit, Trumpism, and surge of ultra-rightist populism illustrate that failures within one's borders are being blamed on those outside borders. Northeast Asia is facing another era of schism and confrontation without being able to completely resolve the division of Cold War system. The U.S.-China strategic competition and increasing security dilemma are complex and difficult challenges. More specifically, a fourth line has been created along the Korean Peninsula, the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the South China Sea. Among these, the Korean Peninsula may become the most intense one and challenging one. Exclusive nationalism and the arms race are fiercer in Northeast Asia than in any other region. And most of the region leaders are relying on security populism to maintain their domestic power. In his acceptance speech of the U.S. presidency, Biden spoke of committing to unifying the country that was torn apart by Trump's divisive politics and to restore America's impaired global leadership. Whether Biden will be able to restore the pre-Trump liberal international order is unclear. In my opinion, in fact, the outlook is a little grim. Trumpism was an accelerator, not a deviation. Trump discarded responsibility of global leadership and chose the path of racist and xenophobic nationalism. The coronavirus pandemic exacerbated this trend. All focus was on shutdowns, and everyone played the blame game instead of working together to solve the problem. Biden described this presidency as an inflection point, which means returning to the original order. But it is uncertain if he can reverse the macro trend. Biden's America will attempt to make a U-turn from Trump's policy by restoring multilateral cooperation, restoring alliance under the catchphrase, America must lead again. However, it could be difficult to maintain the initial goodwill in face of domestic turmoil and challenges. The most important area in foreign policy is undoubtedly U.S.-China relations. The U.S.-China conflict is a structural problem brought on by a shift in the power dynamics of international politics. It is a problem that even Biden cannot sidestep because 70% of Americans have negative feelings about China. The U.S. government hardline policy is nonpartisan in nature, and therefore Biden will have to contend with China somehow. But unlike Trump, who favored bilateral approach, Biden is likely to form a coalition with other countries in its offensive against China. Biden's camp has stressed that it does not want to antagonize China or start a new Cold War, or that it wants to make China a rule breaker, play by the rule. In the early days of Biden administration, the offensive against China could take a short break, and the tone of political rhetoric might soften somewhat. However, the U.S. has a firm position regarding the South China Sea, territorial disputes, intellectual property rights, cybersecurity, and especially technological dominance. Biden also prefers to apply consistent pressure on China through a stronger coalition among allies rather than bilateral confrontation. Korea-U.S. relations will also face changes. Bilateral pressure is likely to decrease. And in particular, the issue of burden sharing will naturally resolve itself. As Biden has stated that he will not treat allies as protection racket as Trump did. However, it was Obama's 8-year Democratic administration that strengthened the U.S.-Japan alliance, built a Korea-U.S.-Japan network, military network to contain China. Most experts believe that Biden administration will do much better when it comes to ROK-U.S. alliance, but concerns have been voiced over U.S.-North Korea policy. The reason for this is possibility of return to 8 years of strategic patience of Obama government, which was all but a neglect of Pyongyang. Another reason for concern is that in contrast to Trump's top-down method, which works well with North Korea's modus operandi, Biden will take a bottom-up approach through working-level negotiation. During the past 30 years, it was mostly Democratic administration that engaged in working-level negotiation with DPRK, as Dr. Izumi talked about. But although the talks frequently broke down because of the emphasis placed on nuclear reporting, inspection, verification, and sanctions. Additionally, some time will be lost because whenever there is a change of government due to the appointing security diplomatic team and policy review, which is going on now. Furthermore, many say that the North Korean issue could be pushed down Biden's priority list due to the domestic problems that required attention. However, a positive outlook is also possible. First, Biden's people strongly object to the term strategic patience amounting to negligence. Biden's camp, which is well aware of such criticism, will not inherit past policies. In addition, it is good that Biden is surrounded by many experts on the Korean Peninsula, Asia, nuclear weapons, and non-proliferation. Also, Democrats always believe in resolving issues through dialogue and negotiations, which is diplomatic principle also shared by liberal government in Korea. This could facilitate policy coordination between the two countries. This is my end of initial remarks, but let me use 1 minute to respond to Dr. Izumi. Mostly, I agree with it. And some people, predicted that if the time is too much, then North Korea is going to do strategic provocation. And actually, I don't buy that proposition. At least I call this North Korean version of strategic patience, at least for 6 months or until end of this year. So maybe, as Dr. Izumi said, second half, we have a big possibility. But still, we're worried about, because North Korean policy is not a top priority for Biden administration, even though it is important, but I don't think it's that urgent for them. So we can see, and we can talk about this later on. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
はい、どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. You talked about the situation in North Korean Peninsula, and I believe that we'll be able to have a very interesting discussion on that topic in this session. But there's another region we should cover, that is the Taiwan Strait. And regarding the Taiwan Straits situation, we have an individual from Taiwan, Dr. Tian-Hun Mao, President of the Institute for National Policy Research. I'm sorry you have limited time, Professor Dr. Tian, but if you could talk about the Taiwanese situation, if you could deliver your presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me make some opening brief remark about Taiwan, and then I would like to address to Taiwan Strait under the Biden administration, as well as previously under the Trump administration, and briefly comment about what may be coming that we should address to as an important issue in the days ahead. My brief remark is to say that, number one, I believe that Taiwan's geostrategic location is vitally important to the free and safe passage of the world's important sea lane, stretching from Japan to the north through Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea to reach Indian Ocean and beyond. Each year, approximately U.S. dollar worth of 5 to 6 trillion worth of goods and commodities travel along this sea lane. Taiwan is an inherent part of the U.S. first island chain of defense in the Western Pacific, presumably to block China's naval entry into the heart of the Pacific Ocean. Taiwan has accomplished to become a stable and peaceful democracy, honoring universal values shared among the world's democratic populace. Taiwan's economy is closely linked to both the U.S. and China. Notably, its high-tech industry are very important to the U.S. industries, both in private business and defense sectors. In particular, Taiwan's semiconductor industry occupies critical positions, as the U.S. and many other countries must have access to such industrial products. For example, the semiconductor chips, which is the heart of IoT innovation. Some estimate the aggregate Taiwan semiconductor industry may account for over 60% of the world's total high-end product. The TSMC is one leading foundry capable of producing the most sophisticated and reliable 5nm chips and ready to advance to 3nm chips production next year. Now let me turn to three major subjects assigned to me by the organizer. Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait under the Trump administration. U.S.-China trade war, a technological rivalry, military contest, all add up to very cozy relations between U.S. and Taiwan. U.S. strong anti-China consensus in public opinions, U.S. Congress and administration's high policy circle led to favorable policy initiatives, passage of many pro-Taiwan laws in the Congress and signed by the president. Arms sales to Taiwan are elevated to high level, more permissive sales in good quality product, closer military to military cooperation. Restructuring of industrial supply chains draw U.S.-Taiwan closer, growing interdependence in critical high-tech economy, semiconductor industry in particular. Chinese tech companies gradually are being denied access to high-end Taiwan industrial components. Under the Biden administration, there were initial concern over Biden's revert to previous Obama China policy, but that has been quickly fading. Most sectors of the upgraded U.S.-Taiwan relations now show little change. Taiwan's geosecurity, democracy, and its values, critical high-end industrial products continue to influence U.S. policy toward Taiwan in her Indo-Pacific strategic plans. General strategic posture of the United States toward China show no visible shift. Only tactical modification has been noted. China remains U.S. long-term stiff strategic competitor. China still imposing heavy military harassment activities against Taiwan. Nonetheless, coercive intimidation has yielded no better expected consequences, which means Beijing anticipated popular fear of China or admiration for its economic and military achievements is far from being Taiwan's mainstream opinion. President Tsai Ing-wen has sent initial signal for rapprochement across the strait recently, but is yet to receive positive response. Taiwan is ready to reconsider any new formula to activate revival of cross-strait interaction. China's complex internal political and economic problems, plus possible power struggle, make it unlikely for Beijing to seek a decisive solution on the cross-strait disputes at the present. Outright whole-scale military actions are simply too risky for the CCP regime, and in particular for President Xi's political fortune. I believe in the year 2021, it is a very important year for the U.S. relations with China, as well as for the Indo-Pacific security. In general, among others, in the economic sector, there will be restructuring of industrial production and supply chains. President Biden has just announced his intention to secure access to strategic products, reducing or rapidly scaling down dependence on foreign unfriendly sources. It is evident that the United States attempt to foster a loose semi-containment scheme among democracies against China and perhaps Russia as well. In political terms, the U.S. is seeking common effort to form closer ties among world's democracy versus the communists and other forms of authoritarian regime. Thus, decoupling or bifurcation of economy, technology, finance, and political value system will be put on Washington's high agenda. Many democracies may be compelled to take sides between U.S.-led industrial democracies as opposed to the China-Russia semi-alliance. Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and Senkaku Island, that is Diaoyutai, may face continuing Chinese military intrusion and harassment. Limited military conflict cannot be totally ruled out. I repeat, cannot be totally ruled out. As President Xi's concentrate in removing domestic political obstacles to set stage for next year's CCP 20th Party Congress, which is expected to endorse unlimited terms for his leadership positions. There could be unforeseen political and military fallouts originated in China's internal maneuvers. Close attention is needed to have for all of us. Beware of the potential bubble burst in the worldwide financial banking sectors as well as in stock market. Finally, in respect to Japan, we have been asked to make comment with regard to that. 3 points quickly. From the standpoint of myself and some of my colleagues, I believe that Japan probably should consider taking a more active and positive role in the Indo-Pacific affairs, which is I consider to be desirable, because the United States in the foreseeable future may have to focus on domestic pandemic and economic problems. Second, closer ties between Japan, Taiwan, US, and perhaps other democracies such as South Korea are desirable in reformulating economic and technological production and supply chains. Third point, which is the final point, closer cooperation of Coast Guard between Japan and Taiwan are necessary to deal with problems in the waters of the South Pacific. This is all I want to say for the moment. Thank you very much.
はい、テン先生どうも。
Thank you very much, Dr. Tian, for your very frank views from Taiwan. Because in Japan, we don't have frequently occasions to listen to voices from Taiwan, especially such loud voices. So we really appreciate your input today. Dr. Takamizawa, or Ambassador Takamizawa, about the situation in the East China Seas, if you could talk about Japan's reactions to the changes in the East China Seas, or the situation in the East China Seas, please. Thank you. My name is Takamizawa. Is my microphone on? Yes, thank you. I would like to talk about, based on what has been discussed so far, the various rivalry between the United States and China is drawing a lot of attention. But what China is saying is, I think, carries a lot of weight, because there are some things that we really have to take to heart, and there are other things that they say they will do but do not do, and things that they say they will do and they also execute. So I would like to talk about how China views the current Biden administration. And this also covers some research results from the Defense Institute, and I think there are three of them. One is that the Biden administration, China regards the Biden administration as a weak and transitory or transient administration lasting only 4 years. And compared to the long-term viewpoint or perspective of China, I think they view the Biden situation as being short-termed. Second is that even under the Biden administration, the basic fundamentals of the U.S. policy against China will not change. Therefore, there will be no reversion to the past. And so that's another point that we will have to consider. And the third point would be the 14th five-year plan and the Chinese long-term program has indicated that China will talk about the dual circulation strategy, that is China wants to initiate the decoupling against the United States, and that would be the main prong of their policy. So I think we have to take to heart the fact that they're planning on this decoupling themselves. And the fourth point is that the current situation, after the Biden administration took office, things have settled down a bit, and therefore they will probably try to reduce the possibilities of a conflict by seeking concessions from the United States, and will probably work to decouple some of these issues. Now, I think it was also discussed yesterday, but General John Allen said that conflict and confrontation, but we may have also cooperation and collaboration, cooperation and competition and conflict. And China has already outlined various programs relating to all three, so we have to respond to that. So in that sense, what's happening in the East China Seas, I think really rests on what sort of laws China will institute, or what they're doing with the social media. And there's a lot that we can learn from them in that their policies are very comprehensive, and that they draw on various different instruments. So we have to take that approach when we compete with China. And next is consistency, that is continuity, I should say, that they have very continuous long-term policies. The Coast Guard law, the territorial waters law was actually instituted in 1992, and so I think what's important is what happens after that. And the third point is core interest focus. That is the Chinese core interests. What they regard as core interests, they will respond very strongly towards. So we will have to be aware of that fact, of their core interest. And the third C is coercive, which is they do take various coercive measures to compel others to do what they'd like them to do. So I think we will have to respond accordingly by taking that into consideration. So as far as the Korean Peninsula is concerned, because Izumi-san and others talked elaborately about this, I would like to talk about the East China Seas. And of course, this is not only focused just on the East China Seas, but even around the world. And in this region and in areas surrounding Japan, the same thing is happening. The 2018 NDPG, National Defense Program Guidelines, talks about 8 threats. One is to threaten others' sovereignty using the military and law enforcement agencies. Second is to manipulate other countries' policy, public opinion using social networks. Third is the possibility of long-term continuation or expansion of gray zone situations, or to the risk of these gray zones developing into major contingencies without much symptoms. And fourth is hybrid war. That is attempts to change the status quo by blurring the border between military and non-military in hybrid wars, and also the pursuit of technological priority in new areas such as outer space, cyberspace, and EMS, and also the increase in unpredictability due to future technological innovations. And this is happening not only in the South China Seas, but East China Seas, and also in cross-strait relations as well. And also on the Korean Peninsula, such use of social media are gray zone situations, I think, are happening. And North Korea's illegal activities in cyberspace, I think, is also becoming very serious. So I think that we will have to consider policies accordingly. As far as the Biden administration is concerned, I believe that China may view the Biden administration as being weak and transitory, but I think that to start off, in the Asia-Pacific region, they did stress Taiwan's position, and also I think there's a continuation of the Trump policy. That is, for Japan, putting aside the style of their policies against Asia, I think that we also feel the benefits of a Trump-like policy. So, for example, cooperating with the partners, and also not meandering into very confrontational areas, I think is one thing we should learn from. So how they will prioritize policies or how we're going to make up for the shortfall in resources, I think would be a major challenge. But as far as I can see, in 2021, it would be, I think, a year of lull. And in that sense, I think that we will have to build up our internal powers and also exert collaborative powers. But when you look at the East China Sea and what's happening there's not much time to lose. Therefore, the Japanese side will have to exert efforts to maintain the status quo as much as possible. And to do that, we must make efforts in a comprehensive manner, including social media and the non-military agencies, and also integrating with others. Without such efforts, we will not be able to maintain stability in the region. Also, Taiwan, the South China Seas, are very close to Japan, and the third issue, Senkaku, all these three issues are linked very deeply together. So we will have to take a comprehensive perspective on all the situations in all these three areas when we develop our policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Each of the speakers have delivered their opening speech, and I thank you all of you for keeping to your time. I think it's very easy for me to moderate this session, thanks to your cooperation. Well, there are several things that really struck me about the Korean Peninsula situation. Professor Izumi and Dr. Kim, I think both of you relatively stated something similar. In other words, North Korea, they are not in a position to strategically carry out provocation. Their economy is experiencing a serious downturn. And so should we think of this as a window of opportunity or a challenge, a difficulty? This is something that is very important for us to understand, I think. So we have to think about this. I also for a long time been observing the Korean Peninsula situation, and the current economic situation in North Korea is more serious than we normally think. This is my personal view, mind you, but several years ago, they were carrying out a strategic provocation, nuclear missile provocation, and this must have been a burden on their economy. And also the triple difficulties. They have sanctions from the United Nations, and I forgot the COVID-19 pandemic and flooding, natural disasters. So this is a triple challenge for North Korea. And at the Party Congress report, as Professor Izumi pointed out, I think they're focused on what to do with the economy. So this is not something that unprecedented as far as I can recall. In the 1960s, late 60s, again, North Korea, they were trying to build the defense and economy. So they were trying to do both together. And they took this approach of trying to do both, but failed. And as a result, they faced extreme economic difficulties. And after the Cold War ended, in the 1990s, again, North Korea faced extreme economic difficulties and were politically isolated. So, and back then, North Korea also, how should I say, were trying to come to the negotiation table, and they were trying to take flexible measures. Because they're faced with economic challenges, and they, so to say, gave in and had to come to the negotiation table. But having to engage in negotiations and whether this was to be thought of as a strategic policy or tactical policy, it's very difficult to distinguish the two. There was mistrust, distrust, but how to deal with this is a very important point. And going forward as well, we have to think about how, the Biden administration, it might be the 4 years of the Biden administration, but we have to understand what is happening in North Korea in these regards. And another point that interested me, it was the cross-strait situation and the Senkaku Islands situation. In other words, there are these two issues which overlap because of China's existence. I'm a layman in regards to this, but it seems to be like that. So I wonder whether we can separate these two issues. And that was what crossed my mind. The role of Japan. When we think about the role of Japan, I think these things need to be kept in mind. Are we going to deal with them separately or not? And this will make a major difference. And therefore, in the discussion, I hope people will try to dive into this topic. Now, I earlier talked about the Korean Peninsula situation. Dr. Kim or Professor Izumi, either one of you can respond and carry out the discussion. But in regards to what I said, do you have anything to say? He will go first. Dr. Kim, it might be better to ask you to go first.
I'll do that. Can you hear me right?
Okay.
Yes. Basically, I think it's a very critical question we have to ask. We don't know exact picture, but as far as I know, the first question you talked about, that the possibility of another strategic provocation, which happened before, is almost like a pattern. And at the turn of the government in the United States, and they're reviewing, and sometimes ignored North Korea too long, and then they try to provoke to get attentions and make position for coming negotiation. That's the pattern. But at this time, I think a little bit different. And in the long term, if they are ignored too long, then they're due. So we should not, or Biden administration should not wait too long. But at least we, by analysis, according to analysis on this recent North Korean statement and the party Congress on everything, I think is still they will have their own version of strategic patience. I don't think they know. They want something they want specific or concrete concession from the North. America. For the past 2-3 years, that they came out to expect something from the U.S., but they think it's all eventful, all events, nothing yet. They didn't get anything, especially Hanoi trauma hit them. But I don't think they break the table completely by themselves. So right now their position is, if condition. They laid out conditions that they can come out to the table if U.S. can give them what they want, which is it has to be concrete and promised before they come to the table. So I think that at least they will wait. And they have a bad memory of the beginning of Obama administrations. That the beginning of the Obama administration, the mood and expectation was high, but the provocation made by North Korea ruined 8 years. So I don't think they're stupid now. They're waiting, but as I said, it's not too long. So this is a challenge or opportunity. I think it's yes for both and no for both. Yes, opportunity, because we have a time. We are not going to ruin at the beginning. But at the same time, if we are satisfied, especially Biden is satisfied with status quo, or just maintaining the status quo. And if North Korea is troubling much, and then they can put aside, or the North Korean issue behind. That's the problem. Second, your question about the situation in North Korea. This is very contending issues. Nobody knows exactly what's happening. But yes, here too, in my opinion, they're serious. Yes, the hardship is real, and especially the long years of sanctions plus this fear of pandemic. But I don't think it's not the condition of like almost at the point of collapse or a crisis. This pandemic situations, right before pandemic situation, they're kind of getting immunity from sanctions. Some sideways and Russia's help and the China's help. It's not good, but they can survive. They can kind of accustomed, familiar with it. But this pandemic was a big challenge. They're horrified, terrified. That's why they even shut down the border of China, which was their lifeline. And if you were not wearing masks, then you have to go to prison. So that harsh measurement. So I don't think it's really, they have a problem. They are not, completely immune from pandemic, but they're trying to get in control in a way. And these days they're kind of get the vaccine from, China and things like that, probably. Triple challenge, yes, but not like mid-90s. At the time, triple challenge. Diplomatic isolations, and this natural disasters, and the famine. Like more than 2 million North Koreans died of hunger. But I don't think they survived at the time. They're trying to survive, but I don't think it's really so. What I'm worried about is this kind of hardship on these analysis can lead some supporters of collapse of North Korea. They give a wrong idea that we can push more, then they can collapse. This is exactly what happened before. And this is not a good idea. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I believe that the scenario of a collapse would be the most riskiest, most dangerous scenario. That collapse of a nuclear-armed country the risks are unthinkable. But even before that, the probability of North Korea, the regime collapsing, I think would be very slim indeed. And the reasons, when I try to explain the reasons, I think that we may deviate from our discussion points. So moving on to Dr. Izumi, you said that within the next 6 months or so, that working level negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea may begin. In June, will mark the 3rd anniversary of the Singapore summit. And therefore, that could be a turning point to study whether the Singaporean agreement is still alive or it's dead. I think we'll be forced into a situation where we will have to make that assessment of whether the agreement in Singapore, reached in Singapore, is still alive or not. So if it's still alive, then we can start with working level negotiations. So what are the prospects in your view? And of course, the Hanoi summit ended in failure. So what is the possibility of this Singapore agreement still being alive and being carried on to working level negotiations? Thank you. Well, I believe that the Singapore agreement will be respected or complied with by North Korea, whether Biden is in office or anyone else. North Korea will try to comply with that agreement. There were 4 pillars to the agreement. One was a new relationship between U.S. and North Korea. Second was a permanent peace administration in the peninsula. And third was a denuclearization of North Korea. And also the return of the remains of U.S. soldiers which remain on the peninsula. Therefore, building a new bilateral relationship, normalizing also peace on the Korean Peninsula, and also denuclearization of North Korea. These 3 were agreed upon. And North Korea wants to pursue all 3 in parallel. And during the Trump administration, they tried a lot, but it didn't work. So I think North Korea's attitude has not changed. Even under the Biden administration, they will still try to pursue the same policies. But so what they're saying is don't just focus on denuclearization, that we should have parallel talks both on denuclearization and the improvement of bilateral relations. And from the Obama administration, the U.S. will always promise improvement of bilateral relations with the denuclearization, but their priority is on denuclearization. And North Korea, if it industriously works on denuclearization, then it'll be rewarded with an improvement in bilateral relations. That was the U.S. attitude. So as a result, denuclearization did not work. From North Korea's perspective, it's the North Korea and U.S. Bilateral relation improvement that has not been working. So what North Korea is thinking is about both denuclearization and the improvement of bilateral relations, or U.S.-North Korean relations, should be pursued in parallel. So I think the key point is how Biden administration regards this. But one other thing is Biden, there was the Iran nuclear deal, which was in 2015. And the Biden administration is trying to return to that deal, the Iran nuclear deal. So if they're going to negotiate with North Korea, then they may model that discussion after the Iran nuclear deal. So that could be one point. And that's not bad at all for North Korea, because the Iran nuclear deal has various features or characteristics. And one main thing, I think, is that the idea was not to talk about ideals from the start or ideology from the start. During the Trump administration, there was a bargaining trade-off between denuclearization and a bright future for North Korea. But that's not realistic. So what we need is step-by-step, realistic policies and changes. And if that is the Biden's approach, then North Korea will go with it. During the Iran nuclear deal, the Obama administration wanted to achieve the denuclearization all-in-one deal. But rather than that, to give North Korea time to take it step by step, I think, is important. And so if you're going to apply this to North Korea as well, then North Korea will be very happy. So how Biden frames this idea, I think, could be a case in point. But I think as of June 18th, there will be an Iranian presidential election. And when a hardline president wins the election, then any negotiation with Iran would become difficult. So I think that there's negotiations now to develop a route for communication or negotiation between the U.S. and Iran. And if that goes well, then that could be applied. That model could be applied to North Korea. So North Korea will most likely enter a working level session with the United States, and they may be very proactive in supporting that approach. Thank you very much. Regarding policy vis-a-vis North Korea, I think there's a big gap between Japan and South Korea. So how to resolve this gap, I think, is a hidden, well, not hidden because it's an issue that will surface sooner or later. So between Japan and South Korea, we have to coordinate policies vis-a-vis North Korea. But to do that, what are we going to do with the issues already existing between these two countries? Can we discuss North Korea without resolving these issues? So I do hope that before the end of this session, Izumi Sensei or Kim Sensei could talk about this topic, Japan-South Korean relations as well. Now, in the East China Seas and Taiwan, well, I'd like to talk about the East China Seas and Taiwan now. As things stand now, I think future prospects would be how should we understand the prospects for policies in this region during the 4-year term of Mr. Biden? And if Dr. Tien could talk about this. I think you touched upon this earlier, but I think it'll be best to start with Dr. Tien. So, Dr. Tien, the floor is yours.
Let me make a couple of statements with regard to that. I think the official policies of our government with regard to East China Sea will be the same as in South China Sea, and of course the cross-strait, namely to maintain peace and stability is the priority of our government. Secondly, our official policy with regard to Senkaku Islands and the surrounding area basically is the same as our policy with regard to South China Sea. In other words, our current government inherited the official position way back from pre-1949 period, when the Republic of China, then under the leadership, the rule of the KMT, publicly announced that China at that time has a sovereign position over Senkaku Island, as well as the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, which the communist government has since inherited from previous ROC government in China. So we are in a sort of an awkward position. On the one hand, in theory, we share with Beijing with regard to the so-called sovereign position in Senkaku Islands, as well as the South China Sea. However, we recognize that this is part of a historical problem, and that there is a new reality that we have to recognize. Therefore, it has been a consistent policy of the government here to approach the East China Sea issue in contention with a sense of pragmatic approach. We try to be realistic. Namely, we are willing to not to push the issue of sovereignty by actually working with all of the parties concerned in trying to reach some kind of solution in that regard, we over the years have been trying, for example, to set aside the questions of sovereignty dispute and to work on practical terms with Japan on such issues as fishing rights. Am I allowed to continue or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. So China obviously has taken a much more assertive stand with regard to East China Sea, namely the Senkaku Island, Tai area. You may have known that the Chinese Coast Guard actually are becoming a very armed Coast Guard, that there has been a law passed to authorize the Coast Guard to be able to initiate the military action without instruction from Beijing. They can do it on spot. Well, I believe the Japanese Coast Guard are not allowed to do that without the permission from Tokyo. And this could be a problem. That's one of the reasons why earlier I reminded all panelists that limited military conflict could break out in the days ahead or even during this year. So we have to be very watchful about the development because the Chinese activity there are being very aggressive. In regard to Taiwan Strait or South China Sea area, I think their military activities are very offensive. And in the final analysis, I believe that they have higher political goal in mind. I do not expect a major breakout or military whole-scale conflict across the Taiwan Strait. As far as the South China Sea is concerned, one has to remember it was during the Obama-Biden administration previously that had gotten the permission from China not to arm the so-called isle or island in the South China Sea, but the Chinese did it anyway. And the previous Obama administration let it go without reacting strongly against that. Now we have a situation. Now China occupy those islands and arm them, and making it very difficult for United States and other countries which have to enjoy a free and safe passage through South China Sea for commercial purpose. China become a major threat to those who are doing that. So it seems to me that while we are talking about North Korea situation, I respect the position expressed now by the panelists, and I also respect the opinion expressed by Dr. Kim. But I believe that one has to remember the United States at this moment and in the foreseeable future simply does not have enough resources and energy to pay attention to all of the disputed issues. Insofar as this Western Pacific region, including Northeast Asia, East and the Southeast part of the Western Pacific, I submit to say that the American priority will be to deal with all of those issues more critically important to China, namely East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea. I am reluctant to believe that the United States will resort to much resources to deal with the Korean Peninsula issue. That's my personal view. I could be wrong. So anyway, as far as other issues related to this, we all realize the United States under the Biden administration is determined to bring the EU country to join with United States in a coalition, either for political security and economic purposes. And in order to do that, I think Biden administration would like to do something that make the European country happy about what the new administration is doing. We should not lose sight of the fact that whatever Biden is doing in the Middle East now, including attack in Syria, has nothing to do with the issues of Iran. I think it is related. I think United States want to get the negotiation moving in Iran as one of the policy priority. That in the event if peace negotiation can start and then concluded, that will make the European allies of the United States very happy. That's the overstates of what I was asked earlier for me to comment. But anyway, they are related anyway. So it seems to me that it is very important in the foreseeable future. We hope that Japan and Taiwan could work much closer in the Coast Guard for the purpose of preventing accidents or to do whatever problem that may be arising in this region. And that's my personal view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time, I'm afraid. But Ambassador Takamizawa, about this Coast Guard issue, well, Taiwan has raised a number of times the issue of Coast Guards. Can you comment on this?
Thank you. Yes, you did mention the Coast Guard, but with the enforcement of the Chinese Coast Guard law, for countries that do not have a similar structure with China, it will be difficult to cope with China's claims because China unilaterally, through its own interpretation of international law, may enforce its own domestic laws, which will be a very provocative and illegal, that is, violation of international law actions. So I think it's necessary for the interested countries to share information and to check how each reacts to these provocations, and also use the social media to make the public aware of what's correct. So the border between military and non-military is blurring now, which means it's much more difficult than in the past to deter many actions. For example, how to deter the gray zone incidents, I think, is becoming much more difficult. So not only Taiwan, but Japan and South Korea, it applies to all countries. We have to think of two things. One is the need of a comprehensive approach, even more than in the past, which means that we have to cut across silos of agencies and institutions to collaborate. And this may be very easy to do for authoritarian regimes, but that's difficult to do for democratic regimes like ours. So we first have to make the effort to cross these boundaries within the country. And also, as the situation becomes even more complex, we must cut across borders and regions to more closely collaborate and have dialogue with various stakeholders. And those stakeholders, we don't need to be exclusive. We need many, many players to be able to have close communication and close collaboration with. So we should not exclude any stakeholders. And so I think those are the two areas where we have to work. And the last point that's very important is we've been talking about comprehensive, a lot of C's, but another C would be capacity. C for capacity. That is, each country must develop its own capacity. And of course, information sharing and close coordination will be required for us to be able to build that capacity, whether it's the Coast Guard or whether it's export control or any other institutions, I think that's very important. So within the global supply chain, Taiwan does play a very critical role. Also, it does play a very, very important role in global health. So we must be fully aware of that and build many more institutions for collaboration or cooperation with that in mind. Otherwise, things will not work out well for Japan or Taiwan or any other country. So in that sense, the Coast Guard is one good example, a frontline example that we can use to develop these models. Thank you very much. We have 15 minutes remaining. So we would now like to move on to the Q&A session. We want to entertain questions from non-panelists. In relation, this is related to what's been discussed, but a question to Dr. Tien. Dr. Tien, this question is for you. Within the next 5 years, is there a possibility for China to engage in military offensive or invasion of Taiwan? Is there such a possibility? And if so, what would be the likely scenario? That's a very frank question. And to Ambassador Takamizawa, there's a question about the how to respond to the Chinese missile threat. What sort of efforts should Japan take to guard against the Chinese missile threat? And to Drs. Kim and Izumi, the question is about in order to promote the security collaboration between Japan, US, and South Korea, what sorts of efforts would be necessary? So, 3 questions. So we have time for each one of you to respond to that question. So please answer the question and also make your final comment if you have any additional comments you would like to make. So this will be the final round of interjections.
Mentioning about the pandemic issue, which I did not include it in my formal presentation because of the limitation of time, I'd like to remind the panelists that up to this point, the total infected cases in Taiwan over a period of 1 year remain less than 1,000 cases. And the total numbers of people die because of that are only 9. 9 persons die in 1 year time. This enabled Taiwan to utilize its labor force for the purpose of working on the economy, which last year grew at 2.85%. We expect that to be approaching somewhere around 4% economic growth this year. Now, as far as China and Taiwan are concerned, obviously, we hope that the peace will be the ultimate goal. The Chinese leaders have frequently said that peaceful unification will be their ultimate purposes, although in actuality, this may not work that way. On our side, I think the government and the people in general prefer the preservation of peace. Whether or not China will resort to whole-scale military attack against Taiwan, I think this will be based on most likely 3 issues. Number 1, Taiwan does something provocative to give the Chinese leadership an excuse to attack. Secondly, nationalism become so overshooting within China that the leadership may be forced to take action to recover what they unilaterally claim to be their lost territory. But I believe that this is not something that needs to be disputed. The third factor depends upon to what extent that they estimate the United States may directly involve in a case of Chinese military action against Taiwan. up to this point, I believe that nobody can actually predict what is going to happen in 5 years' time. If you may remember, going back to 5 years ago, the situation is so much more different than now. So I think my personal forecast is that in the next 2 years, that is to say that before the 20th Party Congress to be held possibly in October 2022, it is not very likely for China to want to resort to wholesale military attack against Taiwan because the outcome is unpredictable. It could be a disaster for China as well. So it seems to me that in 2 years' time, we believe the military tension may continue, but a whole-scale military assault, I believe, is very unlikely. Now, beyond that, beyond 2022, anything could happen. Anything could happen. I think the cross-strait issue is no longer an issue as the Chinese claim to be the domestic issue between Taiwan and China. It is an internationalized issue now. So in that sense, inevitably, some other country may be drawn into the conflict if China use military forces to attack Taiwan. Furthermore, one has to remember Taiwan has its very potent military forces now, highly modernized, particularly in recent years. It will take tremendous effort on the part of China to try to attack and to land on Taiwan. Any sense of failure will be a disaster for Chinese leadership. So it seems to me that while we speculate on what may happen in the next 5 years, I am trained as a political scientist, not a historian. I don't think about issue too far ahead. I think the best we can calculate is 1 or 2 years' time, because the world is changing so fast. So many factors can be altered or reversed any given time. So in conclusion, there could still be a possibility for some kind of rapprochement to work out in the next few years. At least we hope so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today, Dr. Tien, I think you are giving us very insightful comments, and I think the viewers are learning a great deal from you. Now, in the time that remains, it's very limited, but can we ask the speakers to speak in 2-3 minutes? Ambassador Takamizawa, can you respond to the Chinese threat, and also what Japan should do to respond to this threat? Well, I think that is a very difficult question, but the missile, well, we should not just think about the missile threat, but we have to think about the Chinese strategic thinking and also what's behind the missile deployment of China, and not only Japan, but in this region, and countries in this region, including the United States, have to think about how to respond together. The missile threat, how do we deter the missile threat, plus how politically we can try to respond to this. So we have to think about what resilience is required of Japan, and including the capability to send out strategic messages. We have to have a more comprehensive capability to respond to such a threat. It's not just military balance alone. Instead, it's not just balance of power, but power to integrate. We have to involve a number of stakeholders and others, experts in Japan, to think about this. I think that will be critical. But at the same time, we have to have a minimum defensive capability, and if the Chinese operations become very difficult to predict, we have to have the capability to respond to that. And if I may also add something to other issues, JCPOA and Iran, and what impact this will have. And well, it would be if the United States adheres to the commitment, but I don't think that the JCPOA case is a model to the North Korean situation. That's my personal view. And about the future U.S.-China relations, what is important to see is the momentum, how to create trends. China, currently I think the trends are on China's side, and they are trying to shape the order. But Japan needs to increase its capability to change the trend. If not, this rivalry between U.S. and China will improve. Now, Indo-Pacific relations. In regards to this, it's not just this region, but EU and Britain included. I think this is a very powerful tool, and Japan should increase its powerful tools so that we can make the best use of all the resources that are available. We have to be flexible and inclusive. That is all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Ambassador has talked about the various perspectives from Japan's side. And lastly, Professor Izumi and Dr. Kim, to the two of you, including the Japan-South Korea relations, I would like you to talk on this, if possible. So if you could add that to your questions. And security cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and United States. So can we begin with Dr. Kim?
Okay. Respond to the questions regarding the cooperation possibility between three countries. I think it's critical. It's very important. But I'm worried about some, as I remarked in the opening remarks, that some strategists in the U.S. and not trying to have some kind of trilateral alliance containing China. That's very dangerous idea. But issue by issue, especially North Korea issue, I think is critical. So improving Japan-Korea relations is critical. But at this time, it's so bad. So we need to separate these issues. Maybe we can have this North Korean issue as an exceptional case, so we can cooperate. And abduction issues, I should not be the preconditions. It's just very similar issue like a human rights issue in facing this Moon government. We should not put everything on the entrance door. We can talk about in the middle of the process. So not the preconditions. I think in that issue, we have to cooperate. My last point is, right now, the Biden has, they are reviewing North Korean policy. There are three groups that I believe. One is still, there is a small number, but still they're the hardliners pressuring North Korea to the collapse or to complete surrender. They're small, but still under the water. The second group is, I think, is majority. They're the old group of strategic patients. They're saying more pressure to bring North Korea to the table. They're the major, but that can be another return to strategic patients that I worry about. The third group, I actually have a expectation. This new group is more like they're the functionalists. They're non-proliferation group. They're the nuclear weapon specialists. They say the North Korean nuclear capability is so upgrade now. So denuclearization is as comprehensive or in a short time impossible. So we have to think about the reducing the threat or freezing first and then denuclearization later. So they try to have some kind of interim agreement, just like a JCPOA. I hope Biden listened to this group. And another last point is, populism rising and this the nationalism issue. So North Korean issue is not very popular, especially giving them some concessions and negotiating is not popular. but in the long term, it's all good for us. So we have to take that and solve this problem. Thank you very much.
はい、
Thank you very much. Dr. Kim? Once the COVID-19 pandemic is settled, I would love to visit your country and listen to you more. Professor Izumi? I think we're out of time. But what Dr. Kim said at the end, I really support him, especially when he talked about the United States. The third group, the functionalists. I would like to have my expectations, hopes on that group. I think there is a likelihood that they will succeed. And about the U.S., Japan, South Korea cooperation. Looking back, I don't think it will work that much, especially when it comes to security issues. This trilateral cooperation, I really support this idea, and I want this to happen. I've been saying this from the 1990s, but in reality, it's very difficult. And vis-a-vis North Korea, well, when the threat from North Korea was rising, we tend to cooperate well. But once the threat is mitigated, then this trilateral cooperation becomes difficult. Now, looking at the threat from North Korea now, it's not that serious. So I don't think that the trilateral cooperation is going to work, I regret to say. But we shouldn't give up. I don't know when it will happen, but it might be that down the road, we might have an opportunity to cooperate between the three countries vis-a-vis North Korea. So I think it's important that we think about that. And this is an important message to North Korea. And also it's a very important message to China. Because from China's point of view, they would think that this trilateral is impossible. But if we try to show that this trilateral cooperation is an important agenda item. And if we demonstrate this to China, China will be concerned. And I think that China will respond. So I do understand the trilateral cooperation is difficult, but we should never give up. As an approach to North Korea as well as China. Now, as Dr. Kim has said, when we talk about U.S., Japan, and South Korea-Japan relations, we have difficulties with South Korea, and I don't think it'll be easy to talk about South Korea and Japan, but even if we have soured relations, I think that we should take a common approach towards North Korea on a trilateral basis. We should continue to demand this. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we have run out of time. Actually, I think we have exceeded the time by 2 minutes or so, but we really appreciate your very frank and candid, but very deep, insightful views. And as a moderator, I'm really satisfied with the quality of the discussion that ensued. Thank you so very much for your participation. We'd like to end the session.